A real quick one today, back in our series, John or Lazarus, who wrote the fourth gospel? We know the answer to that is Lazarus. This is episode 24, the two unnamed disciples. And I'm going to give you the answer right here now. It's Andrew and Lazarus. The evidence seems to point to these guys. So, our purpose, we're going to try to identify the two disciples who are initially unnamed in both the first chapter and the last chapter of the fourth gospel. That's a gospel according to Lazarus. So kind of like bookends there. First chapter, last chapter, you have two unnamed disciples in each of those. So the disciple narratives in the first and last chapter. In the first chapter, we have disciples of John the Baptist. This is in verse 35 to 42. It says two of his disciples, John the Baptist disciples. Now we know going on in verse 40 that Andrew is named as one of those two. So that leaves one unnamed one here. And we're going to say that this is Lazarus. I think the evidence points there. So consider this Lazarus as the author. He's introducing himself anonymously. And most commentators assume that John is the unnamed disciple. That's because they're sticking with the same pattern where we're going with here. We're just saying that, the guy who doesn't name himself is the author, which is a common assumption, and it's probably a very safe one. The only thing is they assume it's John, but we have a little more here because we know that the author of the fourth gospel is Lazarus. So again, Lazarus is there. Now, in the last chapter, you have a pattern here. We've got the disciples of Jesus. So these guys have moved on from being John the Baptist disciple to being Jesus's disciples. And this is in verse 1 to 14. In verse 2, it says, two others of his disciples. So we know from a few verses later on in verse 7, the beloved disciple is named as one of those unnamed. So I'm going to go with a pattern here and say that because of the first chapter, that's probably Andrew here in this last chapter. So we're considering that to fit the same pattern or structure of the gospel, that other disciple is Andrew. And I'm going to list out three additional reasons. It's not just because of the pattern matching. And you could probably say maybe there's some like chiastic structure there, but I'm not going to get into that into this video here. So again, the bookends of the gospel, first and last chapter, you have Andrew and Lazarus as the two unnamed disciples who were initially unnamed. So our three additional reasons. Number one, some believe that the last chapter was written by someone other than the beloved disciple. The reason they say that is if you look at the end of chapter 20, it really sounds like the book closes. And then with chapter 21, there is reason to believe it's like an appendage that someone wrote later, whether it was Lazarus continuing writing or someone else writing. So if this is true that a different author wrote it, Andrew would fit the pattern of inserting himself anonymously into that chapter that he wrote. There's a few reasons in extension to that because Peter's there, so why wouldn't Andrew be there? And how come he's not listed? Maybe because he's that guy. So point number two in our additional reasons, a majority of the last chapter focuses on private conversations between Peter and Jesus. So Andrew, being Peter's brother, could likely have had inside information from Peter. That way he could have told us by writing later. This is an odd one here. So point number three, counting of the fish. In the feeding of the 5,000 in chapter 6, Andrew is the person who tells Jesus that there is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. And then in chapter 21, the author informs the reader that there were 153 large fish in the catch. So this would maintain consistency as Andrew being the guy who counts the fish for us. I don't know if someone had a specific job of being a fish counter, but if there is someone, I think Andrew's that guy. And I have no idea what the meaning of the 153 fish is. We'll have to figure that out some other day. Another very important reminder regarding chapter 21 is we're told in verse 2 that the sons of Zebedee and 2 others of his disciples were together. So the sons of Zebedee are listed separately from 2 others of his disciples. Again, this is very, very important just for the whole series that we're doing here. The mention of the fact that the disciple whom Jesus loved makes the most sense if the author is describing one of the 2 other disciples, not one of the sons of Zebedee. That's in verse 7 when he says that that's the disciple whom Jesus loved. It really doesn't make much sense to have the disciple whom Jesus loved being one of the sons of Zebedee. It's highly unlikely that the disciple whom Jesus loved could be one of the sons of Zebedee, meaning it's probably not John. So closing thoughts, there's a very strong case that can be made for Lazarus and Andrew as the 2 disciples who are initially unnamed at both the beginning and the end of the fourth gospel. And point number 2, or closing thought number 2, if someone other than Lazarus wrote that last chapter, then Andrew is the strongest candidate. Let me know if you have any questions or comments, anything relating to this. And thanks and God bless. And as always, contend earnestly for the faith which was once for all delivered to the saints. Have a good one.